Hey, friends. I've been reading Ron Wood's autobiography here lately, Ronnie, and I've really enjoyed it. I bought it for the Faces stories, but man, there's a lot of really, really great stories in there. I'm a big Ron Wood fan. I love his guitar playing. He plays like he's playing piano on guitar, and I'm a fan of that sort of thing. But I didn't know that he lived with Jimi Hendrix at one time, that they were flatmates. I looked around and there is a clip of him on YouTube talking about that, but it's really, really short and he doesn't go into much detail. He goes into a lot more detail about it here in his autobiography. I wanted to share some of that with you guys. Um, this is while Ron Wood's playing in the Faces, and he says, actually, it was P.P. Arnold's house. She rented the basement to Jimmy and the ground floor to me while she was in the big flat upstairs. P.P. Arnold was an American soul singer, and she was a backup singer for Ike and Tina Turner. And they were touring, opening up for the Rolling Stones. And Mick Jagger was so impressed by her and liked her so much, he talked her into moving to London. And she ended up in this house and renting part of it to Ron Wood and Jimi Hendrix. Jimmy was in the charts with Purple Haze and Hey Joe, and she had a hit with The First Cut is the Deepest. It's a Cat Stevens song that the great version by Rod Stewart is what most folks know. I guess the Sheryl Crow version, well, more people might know that these days. These were the days when she was going out with Jim Morrison, and he was, as always, bringing her diamonds. Ironically, he died a year after Jimmy, and at the same age. Jimmy loved London and seemed to fit in so well. Jimmy also loved his hat, which he never took off. It was pretty sedated or flat. He was pretty strung out most of the time, definitely more strung out than me. I was too happy buzzing on life, didn't want to fall out too much, and would have allude once in a while for a laugh. But Jimmy was permanently on a plane that was very stoned. We were also both real busy at the time, doing gigs, interviews, coming in and out of the country, so we wouldn't see each other for weeks at a time. But on those occasions we were together, Jimmy was a great, relaxed flatmate. He goes on to talk about how him and Jimmy would sit around and play guitars. And can you imagine sitting around with Jimi Hendrix, trading licks, just trying to pick up something from him? I mean, Ron Wood's really great, but Jimmy's a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother thing. But he says, one night he and I were lying around in our flat in a pillow-strewn room with incense and candles burning, and we talked guitars. He showed me how he could play with both hands, and I was blown away. This was cool as cool, and he mesmerized me. But the thing that struck me about him was how he had so little self-confidence. I couldn't believe it. He confessed to me that night that he hated his own voice, that he couldn't stand singing, and that he wished he could just stand on stage and play. That's what he really wanted to do, just play. I told him to stop being ridiculous and think of his own voice like another instrument. He must have liked that because after I said it, he went to a shelf and pulled out two records and gave them to me. I hadn't heard either of these albums, so he insisted I take them. The first was James Brown live at the Apollo, 1962, and the second was B.B. King live at the Regal. It was recorded in 1964 when the Regal was Chicago's version of New York's Apollo. I'd never heard stuff like this. They were so filled with energy, both of these albums blew me away. This was the Americans taking on the Brits. This was soul versus rock. So there's a lot to take in right there. The idea that Jimi Hendrix had a problem with self-confidence, that's amazing. Imagine there's not many people with more charisma than Hendrix, and definitely not many people with more talent. But he struggled with self-confidence. That's a lesson for those of you out there, any of us who have problem with our own confidence. In fact, Jimi Hendrix was dealing with such things. That's amazing. But these two albums, James Brown live at the Apollo and B.B. King live at the Regal, those are two all-time great albums. And it's great to know that that's what Jimi Hendrix was listening to at that time when he's in London and, churning out all this great rock music or whatever, but he's pulling in all this soul, all of this R&B, blues, and soul that he just like grown up consuming, and he's just putting it out into the world in such a pure form. You know, it's coming out as something different, but what's coming out is 100% pure and 100% undeniable and lasting. Ron Wood goes on to talk about James Brown. James Brown fully hypnotizes the audience with a desperate plea as all the suffering, passion, and ecstasy of his music is delivered in an almost naked grab for the audience's approval. He really got my juices flowing, and in a funny way, he reminded me of Jagger. Got to plug his own band in there in some way. As for B.B. King, he was the man, and a man of impeccable rawness. I suddenly felt tough listening to B.B. with his voice and guitar, tough, strong, wise, sad, and bluesy all at the same time. Jimmy never knew it, but he changed me forever by giving me those two records because they inspired me to play much better. But they weren't the only gifts Jimmy gave me. One afternoon, he came back to the flat with a basset hound called Loopy. I don't know where or how he got it. He lived with Loopy for a while, but he was traveling and couldn't really take care of him. And because I loved Loopy, he gave the dog to me. I thought that was pretty cool, except that Loopy never got house trained and was always crapping on the floor. And P.P. Arnold didn't think that was cool at all, so she threw Loopy and me out. Let's skip down a little bit, and Ron Woods has this to say about Jimi Hendrix. He said, the thing about Jimmy was that he was unique in every way. He was part black, part Cherokee, and part Mexican. He was discovered in New York, and after the Isley Brothers, he came to the fore. Around the time of the British invasion of the States, when the Beatles and the Stones and all the British groups were going there, Jimmy did just the opposite. He invaded England, and it didn't take long before he became a worldwide sensation. I loved his freedom and fluency over the neck of the guitar. Even though he liked to keep himself medicated, we all know how Jimmy played, but to actually see him live was something else. It knocked me out. If Jimmy was in the same town as the Jeff Beck group, which often ended up to be New York, we would jam with him. We did the Staten Island Festival together, but my most memorable jam with him was one time when we were playing the Fillmore East the same night Jimmy was playing somewhere else in the city. We all met down at the Scene Club, Jimmy and his boys, me and my boys, Buddy Miles on drums, the Chambers brothers were there too, and we got up and played. Jimmy loved my bass playing and would call across the stage, "Hold off, let the bass have a go," and I would do a solo. Then Jimmy would come in wizard-like and do a mind-blowing virtuoso solo. Occasionally, a musician's musician comes along, and there's a unique type of buzz created. Jimmy created this buzz big time. It's easy to romanticize this period in London when you're reading Ron Wood talk about it, man, just the people who ended up in the same room together. Like when Ron Wood was playing in the Faces, he talks about, just coming home and there's George Harrison or Paul McCartney, or Clapton, just so many different people just coming over to hang out, Keith Moon. And it seems like an amazing time to be in London, and to think of Jimi Hendrix right in the middle of all of that. It's a beautiful thing. Ron Wood goes on to say, the time I spent with Jimmy was always mellow. He loved his spliff and quaaludes. He was 5 years older than me, which means he was 27 when he died. Though he seemed many years older than that, his death was a real shock, a genuine blow. The week before, in mid-September 1970, he was playing at a 3-day Love and Peace festival in Europe. A promoter got shot, and a few motorcycle gangs went to war. Jimmy had to run for cover, and once he was off stage, one of the gangs burned it to the ground. Jimmy came back to London pretty shook up. The night before he died, I was hanging out at Ronnie Scott's in Soho with Jimmy and others. It was pretty late when he walked out without saying goodnight, so I raced after him and found him walking down the ramp of the club with some girl tucked under his right arm. I called out, "Hey, Jimmy, you forgot to say goodnight." He looked over his shoulder and saw it was me and whispered, "Good night, Ronnie." That was the last time he ever saw him. Like I said, this is a really fun book, man. The Faces stuff is just top tier, and I might talk about that here in the future. Why don't you tell me what your favorite Jimi Hendrix song is? And extra points for the deep cuts. I'm a sucker for Machine Gun, but there's a lot of great Jimmy songs. And I will see you somewhere down the road. Much love to you.